Hello and welcome to Recall This Book. And this is a additional podcast, not exactly a supplement, but a kind of add-on after the Cixin Liu interview that ideally you've just listened to. So if you haven't listened to it yet, there's probably going to be lots of spoilers in this conversation. So go back so you get the soap opera plot in the correct order. But what we just had such a good time with this interview, and we've had sort of heard so much from people about it that we decided the two of us who interviewed him, Wang and myself, would sit down and talk about what went well in the interview, what went badly, and other things that have come up in terms of how we think about him as a writer. So once again, it's co-hosted today by Wang from the German, Russian, and Asian Language and Literature Department, and me, John Plotz, from the Brandeis English Department. So hello, Pooh.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, great. It's awesome to be here. So I should give you a little bit of technical background. We're sitting in the studio after Pooh just created the Chinese language version of the podcast.
Exciting.
It was exciting. How did it feel to?
I just feel there are too many kind of tracks in my mind.
I know, it's true, because we basically in the interview you listened to, the voice of Mr. Liu was given to you in English by Pooh, but of course now we created a track in which he's talking in
you can listen to Liu himself, in his true voice.
Yeah. And then I was lucky enough to hear him give a little speech at Brandeis where I heard Mr. Liu speak English, which was awesome. He was great. Yeah. It was a very grim speech. He compared living on Earth to living in the basement of a tiny apartment house and being locked in a cabinet inside the basement. He said that's what it means to live on the planet Earth.
Yes, yeah. and that block is our universe, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And the block is our universe. Yeah. So we could talk about Liu and optimism and pessimism. That might be a great, a good topic. But so Pooh and I, talked a little bit in advance. This comes right on the heels of an interesting New Yorker profile, and which we will link to. I don't know how many folks here have had a chance to listen to it, but it's a profile that, really attacks maybe is the wrong word, but approaches Mr. Liu and his work from a more political standpoint than our interview did. So it's interesting to think about the space that opens up between how Liu presents himself in that interview versus what you just heard, these discussions about Tolstoy and about aesthetics, about science fiction as a genre. So that may be one thing we want to talk about. But so Pooh, the question I asked you in advance was, what surprised you most in the interview? So do you want to go from there?
Sure, yeah. I think the first surprise actually came before the interview. That was Liu's original kind of reaction to the list of our questions. He seemed to be kind of extremely enthusiastic about a kind of more theory or philosophy-oriented kind of perspective. And I guess, we try to host our interview as kind of not only as professors, but also as big fans of sci-fi.
Yeah.
But still, he found our questions philosophical.
Right.
For good or bad reasons.
For me, number one most surprising was his discussion of Tolstoy, which I hope we'll get to.
Right, exactly.
But number two was the point about science fiction being closer to philosophy than science. Yeah, and that was So tell me your thoughts about that. Yeah.
That is really striking. Both the comment on Tolstoy's huge influence on him.
Yeah.
And he wants to emphasize that it's not only because a socialist China had a big fascination and connection with Russian literature.
Right.
He thought it was also because of his own personality. There is just that affinity with a realist, historical novelist, who's also very philosophical, morally philosophical in many ways.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that point. I really liked the distinction he made. And, it's interesting. I've been reading this book by Slezkin, House of Revolution. Do you know this book?
No.
It's essentially a history of the early years of the Soviet.
I see.
The Union, the revolution, right up through the purges. But it talks a lot about the canonical authors who were popular in the early years of the revolution. Mm-hmm. And Slezkin actually makes a point very much like Liu made, which was, sure, you could align if you want, you could align writers like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky with a socialist past. You could try to make them line up, but fundamentally, that wasn't what was going on. Like there was a level of attachment to them that was not explicable just ideologically, and that really came through. And I agree with what you're saying about Tolstoy and realism, but I think the other thing that came through was the point about world building, which I think is it's a really important way to think about science fiction's relationship to realism, because obviously, you could say, oh, well, in a realist novel, like, say, War and Peace, you don't have to build a world because it's our real world. But we all know that isn't how novel writing actually works.
Exactly,
like the constituting of the reality, the atomic piling up of the details is a huge part of even realist fiction.
That's a kind of reconstruction of the whole historical world. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And what did you think about his story about his own relationship to science fiction growing up? I found that incredibly moving, actually.
Exactly, yes. I mean, I'm not super surprised by that, but, thinking of a young boy, getting books from underneath his father's bed, reading the socialist translations of the sci-fi classics against the twilight of the Cultural
Revolution.
Yeah,
right?
That
Yeah,
was really interesting.
Yeah, and then if I understood his point, the point was that there was then a kind of coming out into sunlight, right? Like the first generation of readers who could actually celebrate.
I think his point is that if you look at certain kind of science fiction, yes, there has been a kind of continuous tradition in modern Chinese literature of writing and reading science fiction. But people didn't see science fiction as an independent, autonomous genre. They just consider it in a less self-conscious way. But he considered himself as belonging to the first generation of self-conscious fan of sci-fi. That's really interesting.
Yeah, totally interesting. And it does go to something that, Pooh, you and I talked a little bit about, but I think it is being explored nowadays, which is to think about how strong an analogy you would make between the current generation of Chinese science fiction and the golden age of American sci-fi, right?
Exactly, yes.
That way in which, because as we all know, like Asimov was part of those early fan communities and then turned into, well, here in Boston, he became a novelist. But, that way in which there's so many things that you could look at as analogous: technological optimism, a moment of world, also, in terms of the standing on the world stage, being very high, global rise, exactly. So, what do you think about that? Do you think that?
I think, Liu Cixin, as a fan of sci-fi, never enjoyed that kind of subculture, but he himself created a following of that subculture. Right now, Liu fans, of course, back in China, have become a community. They use the up-to-date social media tools to communicate with each other, exchanging their ideas about how to prompt Liu Cixin to write the next masterpiece.
That's interesting, yeah. And we have to assume, presumably, there's going to be, as with people like Asimov, there's going to be a whole new generation of writers coming up who were not going to be imitators of him, but were basically formed by the possibilities that he made visible, right?
Yes. I think a lot of younger generations writers see him as someone who opened the door for even younger writers of Chinese sci-fi.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can we actually use that to? I spoke really quickly about the talk that I heard Mr. Liu give, but it was incredibly interesting to me because it was characteristic of him. I think that he has a very broad-ranging vision of humanity in an enormous universe, which is filled with possibilities, but he's also pretty grim about the dangers that are out there, too. Like, in other words, when I think of the Golden Age, when I think of people like Asimov, there's something permanently upbeat. It's like always in a major key, But when I hear Liu talk, I hear both incredible, wide-ranging vision and also a kind of minor key, uncertainty and
darker vision.
Darker vision. Yeah.
True. Remember in the interview, he also mentioned this internet dystopia.
Yes.
So if
totally.
every desire of mine can be fulfilled so easily with a smartphone. Why do I need to move beyond this basement apartment?
Right. And in fact, if I understood what he was saying, wasn't he saying that the people would actually be living literally on mainframes? Isn't that what he meant? That they were living on, in other words, they would be computed beings.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, the ecology of this Earth will be back to pre-human conditions. We don't need to pollute anything anymore.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's totally fascinating.
Crazy,
Right. And there's an Asimov novel, which I want to say is called Gateway to Eternity. We'll put the correct title up on the website. But it involves living in a world where time travel is possible, and the result is that people have become completely inward-looking. And the hero, spoiler alert, the hero of the book basically breaks the time travel loop so that humanity can go outward to the stars. So that's the same spirit as what as Liu was saying, which is like we need to explore, we need to leave this planet. But with Asimov, it's just like, hurrah! Whereas with Liu, I thought, oh, no, he doesn't think we're going to manage it, actually.
Right. I think, if we take the three-body problem trilogy into account, then it's great to have interstellar travels, but it doesn't lead us to any better place. Actually, it comes with huge risk.
Right. So, and for those of you who haven't read, we'll try not to give away the vital details of the novel, but there is a reason, like this title of the second volume, The Dark Forest. Is that the same in Chinese?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the implications of The Dark Forest are very dire in terms of that notion of like, hurrah, hurrah, hey, everybody, we're here.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wait a second, we just told everybody we're here.
Yeah, and we can be even reduced in our dimensionality.
Right.
If a kind of higher civilization eventually figure out how to deal with it, and I think that's also the power of fiction of novelistic scale. There's no kind of finite solutions or answers to questions raised.
Yeah, totally. I'm really glad you mentioned the word scale here because it does. One of the connections I was thinking about is I often think about science fiction's relationship to naturalism, and if you read only one page of Liu's three-body problem, I recommend the introduction, or maybe it's the afterword, where he talks about scale, how he's fascinated by scale, that he said even as a kid he realized he could conceive of things on a vaster scale than other people could. Yeah. So one of the ways I try to describe three-body problem, the trilogy, to colleagues or friends I'm trying to persuade to read it, is to say that whenever you think you've mastered the plane of the novel, it turns out it's rotated, that there's another dimension you haven't seen. So the novel itself performs that act of kind of rotation.
Yeah. And also for me, the really exciting part, even though I sometimes find disagreements with Liu's approach or Liu's kind of predictions, quote unquote, is that whenever there is this new unfolding of a different level that comes with new civilizational options.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And that's really kind of humanizing, but at the same time entirely beyond any human reality as we know it today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And maybe that connects to a question that here's another thing I was kind of surprised by. And this, you could tell me that this is just me.
Sure.
Okay, I'll just put it out there. I don't see what all the fuss is about 2001. When he talked about how Kubrick was this genius who had transformed the way that he and so many other people saw the world. And I said, oh, yeah, well, I just watched it too. But actually, I watched it and I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think Liu made a big deal of it.
Yeah.
He said it was just like a kind of clan. It's like a tribe,
Yeah.
You need to have initiation into that.
Yeah, I take that point. It's like,
but I totally understand. That the film is just a film. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking about what he said about. I mean, how would you unpack what he was saying about the different genres? First of all, I think it's clear that he wasn't saying he himself would prefer to be a filmmaker. I mean, he's happy as a novelist. But yeah, science fiction is one of those genres, or maybe we want to call it one of those modes, that what's going on in the visual sphere is often as interesting as what's going on the page. I mean, there's been some very important sci-fi movies.
Right.
What do you think he was saying? was he saying that the film is the science fiction of the future, or?
I think what he said really goes against my instinct as a literary scholar.
Yeah,
we have
me
this
too.
we have this deep faith in the
Yeah.
medium of language,
Yeah.
not to say the ontology of language.
Yeah.
But I think he wants to be a writer. He wants to work with language and words,
Yeah.
but he doesn't see any problem of having a future of sci-fi in
Yeah.
cinema theaters.
Yeah.
And even
And
though
also, to be fair, sci-fi has a past in cinema as well. Like, in other
Exactly.
words, Voyage to the Moon, Metropolis.
absolutely,
I mean, in
yeah.
other words, it's like as old as the film. Like, sci-fi has been there for a
Yes.
long time.
Yeah. but he doesn't, he doesn't. He believe. It seems to me he believes that if the money is there, if the financial
Yeah.
conditions are favorable, if the technological industrial conditions are there, we can make really great sci-fi
Yeah.
blockbusters. Even though he doesn't want to
Yeah.
want to be part of it.
Yeah. So speaking of which, have you seen Wandering Earth, the
Yeah,
film?
I saw it.
Yeah.
I contributed to its box office by going to the only cinema theater that aired it.
Fenway, right?
Yeah, in
Yeah, me
Boston.
too. Yeah. I know. It was a lonely voyage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I know. So let's talk about it. What did you think? And have you read the story too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read the story, in a really kind of fast,
Yeah.
kind of cursory
Yeah.
fashion.
Me too. Yeah.
I think still he said so many great things about the power of kind of visuality, but I see a lot totally missing in the cinematic.
It's true. Like the nature,
representation.
right? The nature of the political struggle in the story, which you briefly alluded to, between the people who want essentially to take the whole Earth out of orbit and sail away from the sun versus the people who just want to abandon Earth.
Right.
That's really interesting. There's all of this kind of mass suicides. There's
that's actually pretty
yeah.
Tolstoyan in
Yeah.
many ways. It's historical, novelistic kind of stuff.
What
Yeah.
I wanted to, as a way of kind of getting at to politics, I wanted to ask if you shared my feeling that the movie was much more nationalistic than the story.
I think so. And
Yeah.
of course, I do not see it entirely from the ideological perspective. I think this movie was the first attempt of making a Chinese blockbuster.
Right.
They wanted to really pitch it toward Chinese audience in mainland China.
Yes.
So it was, for me, much.
It was released on Chinese New Year, wasn't it?
Yes,
And there were like
yes.
lines about a new year in the film.
Exactly. It's a basically for me it's market strategy.
Yeah.
But it definitely speaks to this kind of nationalist sentiment, nationalist pride that is currently shared by so many mainland Chinese citizens in the age of so-called China's global rise.
I mean, I might be completely off base here, but I thought in some ways it was a response to Independence Day, the American, blockbuster fighting off alien invasion. And that's like a July 4th movie, and all the heroes are American. And I did think there was a kind of tit-for-tat quality here.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. I think eventually that becomes a kind of... on the one hand, some people would say, "Oh, this is a U.S.-China competition of sci-fi blockbusters."
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you see this mirror image. That is basically they have the same structure. The only difference is that that's U.S. Nationalism, and here we have Chinese nationalism.
Yeah. So speaking of which, maybe that's a good time to talk briefly about the New Yorker profile.
Sure.
Just tell me, will you tell our readers about it, or tell us your thoughts about it? Or?
Yeah, I think
listeners, not readers. Sorry.
This profile, actually got a wide distribution. Not only here, it's from New Yorker, so it's pretty big. But it also it was also widely read back in China.
Yeah.
Both in English, the original English, and in the translated form online.
Yeah.
So I think in this kind of conversation between a staff writer of New Yorker and Liu, the whole conversation about sci-fi turns into the realm of politics, and especially today's Chinese politics.
Yeah.
But of course, this is not only Chinese domestic politics, but about China's role on the global scale, especially as China being a kind of non-democratic regime, but a very important player of international community and global market.
Yeah.
So I think this is my reaction to this profile is that Liu seems to be far less prepared for those questions.
Right. She didn't write the philosophical questions in advance.
Right. And it's a little bit amusing to me because he seems to be so eager to talk about philosophy and physics with us. So that's something really interesting. And my second point is that I just feel it is absolutely feasible to raise a lot of political questions by reading Liu's work, by interviewing Liu in person. But the whole piece for me seems to take a relatively reductionist approach to what is political. And it is a framework of inevitable competition between United States and China as to different social structures, and then project this kind of prediction of conflict into a kind of sci-fi scale. And I think people like to talk that way, but I don't want to read the rise of Chinese science fiction literature as the next arena of U.S.-Chinese trade war, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. Let's hope not. Can I ask, like on a kind of practical level, presumably Chinese public intellectuals, including writers, who face conversations in the West or have interviews in the West, and you can think about lots of people who made a name for themselves. They have to know that this sort of question is coming. And do you think he was? I mean, the man we met didn't seem like somebody who, he's not a diplomat. He didn't seem like Richard Holbrooke or Metternich or something.
Right, that's true.
He didn't.
He's not equipped with good answers for Xinjiang questions.
Yes, exactly. That was where it came to. You're talking about like the Uyghur stuff.
The democracy questions and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of Chinese intellectuals and writers from the humanistic backgrounds, it doesn't matter what kind of ideological leanings they have. They seem to have a kind of very ready-made ideological responses to this kind of questions.
Right.
But Liu doesn't belong to that community.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to watch.
To me, it may be that he produced something that was like what he thought would be like the politically expedient response, but it just felt like, it didn't feel managed in a way, what he had to say.
I mean, it's also because he's not much interested in his public image.
Yeah.
And he's not ready for that, or he's not. It's the same back in China. He sees his own fame as something really unexpected.
Yeah.
And that's why he refuses to have an agent. He refuses to move to bigger cities.
Yeah.
He refuses to really be actively participate in the making of film adaptations and so on and so forth. So he's just a different kind of writers, and for me it's I don't know whether he wants to transform into a kind of more sophisticated intellectual voice, or he would just shy from this kind of interactions in the future. Yeah.
To me, like one of the most fascinating things he's ever said remains like somebody asked him, apropos of how much Obama likes his novels, if you had a chance to speak to a series of world leaders, what would you say to them? And I won't get the quote exactly right. He's like, but I would say not to underestimate not to underestimate the possibility of alien invasion. It's like,
Right.
and by which he obviously means space invader invasion. He's not talking about international aliens.
Right,
but,
exactly.
And I think that was completely sincere. Like that's like at the heart of his politics.
So
is
that
like,
that is,
Yeah.
his thinking is just in a different mode. I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Well, so final question, Pooh. What do you think we missed? Like what when you look back at that interview, we we got him to talk about a lot of things, but what should we have talked about that we didn't?
Yeah, I actually, I've given some thought to it after, ever since I read the New Yorker piece.
Yeah.
I think if I were a New Yorker staff writer, not only a kind of Brandeis professor, then
Yeah.
I would really want to ask more questions about Liu's social imagination to really
Yeah.
follow up with all his kind of brighter or darker visions of civilization. That is, how does this Chinese sci-fi writer imagine social relations?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that will absolutely give us a much liberating discussion of the political,
Yeah.
actually. And I think that is a little bit missing in our conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I was thinking about that with that image of 10 billion humans on computers. I was thinking that would have been a good place for us to say more about the virtual and like life online and yeah, exactly. The social imaginary in terms of like practical affordances of different technologies, but also the larger political implications of living together and living apart. And,
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was a fascinating conversation nonetheless.
Yeah, I like it
yeah.
very much.
Yeah.
I think, we're digging a lot out of this writer.
Yeah,
and I don't want to, do too much self-congratulation, but I think our kind of interview with Liu is pretty valuable because we definitely made him talk a lot about philosophical issues.
I know. Next time we're gonna have an all Tolstoy podcast. We're gonna break down the Tolstoy versus Dostoevsky. Maybe we'll talk about Goncharov and see if he likes Oblomov. But I was going to say, Pooh, you should come back sometime. We should, you should.
Thank you for having me. Yeah,
totally. And if we should do it again. If you want to pick a different writer for us to interview, I liked this dual language format. So we should think about that too.
Right. As long as we can endure the labor. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, that you all credit to you. Okay, so I think from both of us here, your co-hosts, I will say thank you for listening to Recall This Book. So my co-host today was Pooh Wang, recently tenured professor here at Brandeis. I'm John Plotz. And as always, our thanks go to Claire Ogden, who does the technical and audio editing, and Matthew Schratz, who manages our website and social media, and to Brandeis University for the support. And please, to listeners like you, please do forward this to other people you think might be interested in listening. Do rate or review us on iTunes or Stitcher or our website or wherever you listen to podcasts. So from all of us here at Recall This Books, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.